Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Allison Meyers, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. Like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go all the way up to today. And we want to talk about the amazing work that you're doing with corporations and with leaders in particular. I absolutely love what you're doing, and I know it's needed big time. So I'm super excited for our time together. Thanks again for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. And Mike, I'm going to kick it off by saying, call me Allie. I said my website is Allison Meyers, but please call me Allie. I'm much more of an Allie than an Allison.
I got you. Okay. I saw that in your I saw that somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So share with us where you were born.
Oh, I love that we go back this far. I was born on Long Island in New York State. Most of you, I'm sure, have heard of Long Island, but today I live in upstate, which is incredibly different than the Long Island and the New York City area. So I just have to lay it out there. A New Yorker and another New Yorker are not necessarily, equal here.
Right.
So, I'm currently living in upstate New York, but was born there. We moved to this general area when I was younger. My parents, my mother specifically was one of six, and her father moved from Long Island after being there his whole life to purchase a motel in Lake George, New York. I don't know if you've ever heard of Lake George. It's a fabulous lake that I spend a lot of time on now. And I grew up with my 5 siblings, visiting this Lake George motel all the time, being around a lot of Canadians who I had never seen before in my years on Long Island. And really, just living the typical fun kind of on your own, go out and play, don't come home until it's dinner time life with my 4 siblings.
So your favorite thing about growing up there, was it that freedom? Was it that going out and until it was time to come home for dinner?
Yeah, I think I think I'm blessed because I'm one of so many, because it really forced my parents to give us that freedom and make us develop skills, which we'll probably talk about later on, that are really critical to every part of your life. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the way we live today holds us back from developing those skills. So I'm blessed to be born and raised in the time where I was able to, having a mom who worked really hard. She was a nurse and she was a realtor, and my dad had a job as well. And, that typical latchkey kid where, we were on our own. We had to be, self-initiators, whether it be our homework or, coming home to feed the dog or, helping them get food on the table. And everybody played a part.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
Well, I have to say, I know it always sounds so cliche, but probably my mom. She is this typical little cranky Italian woman, and we always respected her. We always knew who the boss was, and she has always, to this day, been really the focal point of the family, the connector.
Yeah.
And I loved how she could always do that, and she could run a household, and she could be a great mom without being overbearing, and still showing us that, sometimes you just really have to work hard. And she always was a great example of that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So in high school, did you have a favorite subject?
Well, let's just say, let's be happy that there were no cell phones in my high school years. Okay. I've always been very social. I love to go to the parties, but also I was a very studious student always, and I loved maths and sciences always. Not so much, the English and, the social studies, but I always had a thing for math and science. And
That's
so that's
cool.
really what drove me into going in the direction in college. I went to Clarkson University, which is a small engineering school in upstate New York, where I
Mhm.
studied chemical engineering.
So why did you choose Clarkson?
Honestly, I chose Clarkson because my older sister, who I was quite close with, went to a liberal studies school in that town. And Clarkson had a really great reputation for being a fabulous engineering school. They had a really great placement rate among a lot of Fortune 500 companies post school, a lot of great opportunities. They really supported the kids in finding what we called co-ops or internships. And it sounded like a perfect distance where I could visit my parents, but they wouldn't be on top of me, and I'd have the family connection with my sister being in town.
That's awesome. Why chemical engineering?
This is a funny one, Mike. Actually, when I started at the school, I was a biology major,
Mhm.
and I saw that the forte of this school was really their engineering program. I'm sure I would have had a great experience in the biology program, but I said, boy, like these engineering students are really getting a top-notch education. So I went to my advisor and I said, which is the most challenging? And he said,
Mhm.
oh, chemical. And I said, I'll take it.
Really?
And now, to be honest with you, there are so few things that I use from my years of
Mhm.
my education in terms of chemical engineering. But what was great about it, as with every experience in our life, right? Everything is a stepping stone to something bigger,
Mhm.
and it can always have a some sort of learning opportunity. And that was really the value of hard work and discipline. And, sometimes I didn't have great semesters and I had to, buckle down and, refocus and figure it out.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the question for you. You went to your counselor and said, "What's the most difficult?"
And I'm sure he thought I was crazy, right?
Well, okay. What was it that made you do that?
I don't know. I can't even answer that. I just think I'm always up for a challenge, and I knew that I of course could always find another path if it didn't work out. But I just I knew I had it in me, and I went for it.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You're just a champion at heart.
Yeah. I don't know about that, but I definitely was more social. Let me tell you this, than the majority of people in my program. We had a lot of foreign exchange students because we were a really intense engineering school.
Mhm.
And, they were quiet. They were probably, still a little uncomfortable with life here in America. And, here is this, big mouth, boisterous girl who's in a sorority. And, it was the way I was. And I think ultimately, between, my hard work and my value of being social and understanding the value of connecting with humans, I ended up going with a girlfriend of mine on a spring break vacation and meeting a woman in line. Both of our friends left us, and we're pushing our bags up, and we're kind of whining that our friends, both left us. And it turns out she was a human resource manager at DuPont. And so she asked me, so what do you do? What's your major? Where do you go to school? Oh, I've heard of Clarkson. And it just so happened because I had this conversation and we ended up, going out, I think for lunch with these women during our, the delay. Uh, I got to know her. And when an opportunity fell through that she thought she had in terms of a summer intern, she was caught in a tough place, and she gave me a call and she said, hey, send me your resume. And within 3 days, I had to, go down to Delaware and check into my first internship there at DuPont Company.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. So there
So
is so many pieces of the puzzle in terms of the value of social connection.
so what was your favorite thing about attending Clarkson?
Oh my. What was my favorite? I really loved the fact that it wasn't a giant school. Because I'm from a, suburb in upstate New York. I could not have managed a big campus, a big city. It was just enough to, help me grow both educationally and socially and responsibly. And at the same time, not feeling uh, so out of my body that I couldn't manage it all. So I really liked the small size. And I find myself encouraging my sons, I'm sure at one point, when they're looking at colleges, I will take their own personal preferences into consideration. But I really think there's so much value in the small, smaller classes, at least, at that phase of your life.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So here's a question for you. You start your internship with DuPont.
Mhm.
What was the number one most important thing you learned during your internship with DuPont?
The biggest thing that I learned, so I worked at a nylon factory. It
Mhm.
was not fabulous conditions. I worked with hundreds of machine operators day in and day out. And again, it all goes back to the importance of human and personal connection. I knew, and I'm not saying this just selfishly, but I knew if I wanted to get anywhere with these people, either in terms of them understanding why I'm doing a specific experiment or study, or maybe, getting onto their machine, get onto their machine to do a test that's maybe out of sequence, that I needed to build trust with them. And no matter what role you played, it was really important to build trust with everybody, at every level, and really help them understand how they are part of the bigger vision, and how I am part of the bigger vision, and how together we can help the mission of the company or the client, or whatever problem they're having, succeed. And that's probably a philosophy that holds true today, and continues to follow me.
So that would be important considering you're an intern in college,
Mhm.
brand spanking new to the facility, right, and to the company. And those people that you're talking to have been there for years,
Mhm.
and they've been on that machine for years.
Mhm.
And here you
Yes.
are, right?
Yes.
I mean, that is going to cause some consternation to an extent if you're not effective
Mhm.
at communicating with them and
Yes.
getting them to be a part of the team and a
Mhm.
part of the solution.
Yes. And, going back to what you mentioned earlier, opening that conversation with, okay, you do this way.
Mhm.
Tell me why you do it that way.
Yeah.
You've been here. I've only been here for 3 weeks. You
Yeah.
tell me, you've been here for 30 years. Why do you do it that way? You start by soliciting their advice, and
Yeah.
you immediately have gained trust. And when you
Absolutely.
hold that space for them, you can turn around and then maybe ask them to do something that they may have never done before, but you have much more credibility in doing
Yeah.
so.
And you're the expert, right? You've been doing this all these decades. You
Right.
know more about this than I'll ever learn,
Yep.
right? Share with
Yep.
me how we can make this work together, because really I need to follow your lead. And all of a
Hmm.
sudden they're in,
Hmm.
right? They're in.
Yep. Yep.
Leadership
So
101.
yeah, exactly. And so that was a really fabulous experience for me. I got invited back for 2 more summers, and then got offered a full-time position at DuPont, where I worked for many years, before I moved to the area and started having children. And
That's
so,
awesome. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
So you worked for DuPont for how long?
for about 10 years in total.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then you
And
made a decision to leave. And
yeah,
you
yeah,
said it
and
was, go ahead.
but sorry about that, Mike.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
A variety, I had a variety of positions within the company, of course, all being kind of a building block to bringing me closer to what I ultimately want to do. I think when you're working in the field of chemical engineering, that's a very umbrella term here, but you tend to be, pushed out to the Gulf Coast, to manufacturing facilities. And I knew that I loved science, and I loved the whole, scientific theory, and the, just everything about experimentation. But I also knew that I had to be able to use my social skills in one way or another, over and beyond working, in a manufacturing facility and really never leaving the walls of it. So I ended up taking a position in their sales force where I did technical sales, where not only did I, sell the product, but I helped them troubleshoot. So I was able to use both my personality and my brain, which I enjoyed doing.
That's awesome. So at some point you leave DuPont.
Yes.
Where do you
Yeah.
go?
So I ended up leaving DuPont and moving to this area. I had recently gotten engaged to my husband today. And shortly after, we had our first of 4 children. And of course, you have no idea it's happening at the time, but he was born with some, developmental delays, which really made me hesitate jumping right back into the workforce in a
Yeah.
full-time capacity, working, for, let's say, a corporation.
Right.
So we had our first, who just turned 16 a couple days ago, and shortly after, a second boy, a third boy, a fourth boy. And those, they were some of the most challenging years. I always had some sort of job. I worked for our family law firm doing some marketing. And then I had a variety of other kind of smaller entrepreneurial ventures as I was managing him and the household and his needs and the family's needs. And it wasn't until, a few years ago that I really went back full time. So
you go back full time. What do you do full time?
So, what I had been doing, and this is again, all these building blocks throughout the years of, um, working for Myers and Myers, who is our family law firm. I was feeling like I was becoming very disconnected with the whole digital world. This was at an instrumental time in technological growth where I was starting to get nervous that, I'm not in the workforce at this time where these kids who are so much younger are building these skills, and I'm going to be left in the dust. And so I started doing a few things to at least keep me relevant, is kind of what I was thinking in my head, right? But to learn some basic digital skills that I didn't know when I, started having a family. So things like blogging,
Mhm.
how to use WordPress, what's social media, how to use Facebook for business purposes. And so while I was doing some charitable things at the time and working part-time for our family business, I started doing a little style blog. One, because I'm interested in style, but more importantly, because I really wanted to use that as a way to experiment with how people are communicating today. And, just doing something casually on the side gave me the ability to build skills that I knew would be valuable someday in some capacity. Of course,
Right.
you can't always see every step, but you know it's going to be needed,
Yeah.
right? So that I was doing that, and then when I came back, so my first full-time job back was the right before the pandemic started. I actually started something called the Scoop Saratoga, which is my hometown is Saratoga. I wanted to use these skills and continue to build my skills, but now in a way that I could monetize.
Right.
So building a whole different set of skills, contract negotiations, and things that I never had to do because I was never in an entrepreneurial venture of sorts. So I started this local blog where I covered, it ended up being coverage of a lot of small businesses when they were not able to open their doors during COVID. And I ended up starting this local blog where I featured them, I interviewed them, I showed what what their product or service was, and I created a blog that was monetized through small business partnerships within my community. And again, that continued to open me up and open up my skill set to things that I knew I would be using. And as I was doing that, I could just feel more and more of a pull to address mental well-being. One, because I've always been interested in, I was the kid in engineering school while people are at the labs reading, the Dalai Lama's Art of Happiness and reading, psychological publications to understand what makes people thrive. What makes the most successful people successful? What are they doing that the rest of the world isn't doing? So putting all of those things together, I became certified in positive psychology and executive coaching, which gave me the fundamental knowledge to be able to go into businesses. I never really wanted to, at least as of right now, I don't want to do one-on-one coaching, but what really was desirable to me was to take my creativity, which I love. I love to be creative, something that my engineering job could never really give me the ability to do. To take my creativity, my building skills within the digital space, and to focus it on something that I feel is incredibly needed in today's world. And having kids, who range from 8 to 16 right now, I am very concerned with the trajectory that we are going in. And I think we all have the opportunity to tighten up some of our habits and to just learn what's working against us, learn what can be working in our favor, and to understand that we have to be incredibly intentional with the way we're living today, because it's not the same world that it was 20 years ago. So
Totally
putting all
agree.
those things together, I launched my business a few years back where I created workshops for the professional space, where I help people learn how to manage their stress through my building blocks of resilience and how they can integrate that into their lives. And then from there, I did that for a few years, which is leading into the fact that it can't stop there. We can't just be integrating it into our lives. We also have to be integrating it into our workplaces. Burnout is, continues to be at record highs. So what can we be doing to, not only support ourselves, and to teach our employees the fundamental principles of staying mentally well, but how can we set examples and lead by examples, and how can we support them in living their best life and retain them and to help them feel productive and to help them flourish?
Okay. So you talked about blocks of resilience.
Mhm.
Talk about that a little bit more. Get a little more specific about that. What is
Sure.
that?
So part of my framework, I've created what's called the 5 building blocks of resilience. These are 5 areas, Mike, that have been proven by science that if we feed into them, it helps build what I like to talk in very basic speak here. The helps build a resilience cushion. So helps
Okay.
prevent us from being pulled under by life's inevitable unknowns and all these little micro stressors that are around us every day in 2025. So, what can we do? So the 5 building blocks, do you want me just to go one by one, or how about I'll just tell you what one is and you can ask me about it?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Whichever you'd prefer. I just want to know what they are.
Oh,
I want
okay,
to know
sure.
specifically
So
how they help.
Sure. So the first one is managing the negative. Okay. We all have something in us called a negativity bias. Okay. And I know some people are familiar with this, but we give 3 times as much attention to the negative things, negative experiences in our life than we do the positive ones.
Yeah.
So this is why negative news sells.
Mhm.
Um, there is a famous neuroscientist called who's named Dr. Rick Hansen, and he has a really great quote. It says, negative experiences are like Velcro, while positive experiences are like Teflon. So they just bead right off of us. So it's really important that we recognize that, our default is going to the worst case scenario and to
Mhm.
thinking, negatively. So what are we doing proactively to infuse that positivity and to infuse those positive thoughts into our everyday, or else we will be pulled under by this negative. And that was super helpful, that negativity bias. Years ago in the prehistoric times, when the consequence would be being killed by some sort of wild animal. But today it just causes unnecessary stress about something that could happen that probably won't.
Right.
So in terms of managing the negative, we can either manage it physiologically. So if we're having like a really stressful moment and we can't even get our thoughts around it, really using our breath. I teach different techniques to stopping, breathing, and being. Just using your breath, slowing it, deepening it to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which can really calm your body instantly and get you in a stressful moment to think, to respond more thoughtfully versus reacting. So that's the physiological. And then just more of like the mental and emotional in terms of managing the negative. Um, really trying to build a growth mindset and recognizing that setbacks are not necessarily failures. They're almost always, giving us information that helps us move in a positive direction, and purposefully bringing that to the top of mind and recognizing that.
Yeah,
So
Tony
that's
Robbins. Tony Robbins has a favorite phrase: when we succeed, we party.
yeah,
When we fail, we ponder.
there you go. I
Right?
like that. I haven't heard that one.
We actually
Exactly.
learn more from failing than we ever will from succeeding.
We absolutely do. Yes. And so that's the managing the negative part. Mindfulness. Okay. Mindfulness is my second building block. And this is something that I just feel is in such a deficit in our modern way of living. We fill every void with, where's my cell phone? It's around here somewhere, grabbing that phone and scrolling. And that has a lot of negative consequences. So I highly encourage people to try to time block, try to take time away from your phone, create barriers, create boundaries, and let yourself fall into that flow state, that state that, we feel really productive and time almost stands still because we're having a hard time. You had mentioned before our inability to keep our attention.
Mhm.
You know, researchers have this term, something called popcorn brain. Maybe you've heard
Mhm.
this because it's in reference to what you said.
Yeah.
Because we're filling every void with hyperstimulation and scrolling, when things are kind of regular and boring and we don't have a device or a screen in front of us, it's really hard to keep our attention. And as
Yeah.
a result, our attentions are getting smaller and smaller, and it's harder. Think about high school students now, who have to stay focused on something that they really could care less about.
Mhm.
So creating space for mindfulness. And I like to remind people, the definition of mindfulness is really being able to observe your thoughts and your experiences from a 10,000-foot view without judgment, without it getting wrapped up in emotion. So if we're able to create a little space in our day, 5 minutes in the morning, device free, television free, no people around, and just be with our thoughts. Okay. Sometimes it's those moments of silence that show us, solutions to, the most pressing problem in our life. But if we don't take even small spaces of time throughout the day, it's really hard to manage all of these challenges that we have, and we feel much less able to do so.
That's
So,
awesome. I love that.
yeah. So there's a lot of different ways that we can be more mindful. The easiest way, really brushing up on your conscious screen time, really trying to take breaks from it, take your walk without your phone. But there's also more proactive ways, like starting a short, solitude, a journaling practice, a solitude, a prayer, whatever you want to call it, quiet, or even just something like a five senses walk where you're feeling completely overwhelmed with all the work, or you're feeling really foggy in the middle of your workday, taking a quick 5-minute walk outside and connecting with one by one your five senses. They're short, simple things to do, but in today's world, we need that reset and we're not getting it. And that cortisol is increasing, and we have no ability to recharge.
And that sort of goes back to building block number one, too, right?
Yeah.
Building block number one talks about the physiological
Mm-hmm.
effect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, physiological, you can actually, if you're stressed, you can go move. If you don't know the answer to something,
Yes.
move, right?
Yes.
Don't take your phone with you, just
It's
go move. Some of
yes.
the best thinking people can do is just on a walk, and all you're doing is listening to the birds sing. All you're doing is
Yes.
looking at the leaves, or you know what I mean? Like, you're just enjoying the simple things in life. The sun's out, the sun's on your face, that kind of thing, and
Yes.
you're getting your blood moving,
Yes.
right? I
So
mean,
I have to share this one great story that I know you'll appreciate, Mike. I was speaking to a group of CEOs in the power industry. So as you can imagine, it's mostly, I'd say 90% males over the age of 60, if I had to
mhm,
guess. So, you're a little apprehensive talking about some of this stuff. You're like, oh, boy, they're going to think it's a bunch of woo-woo. So this one guy in the front row who looks real rough and gruff said, "Can I just share what I do when things get stressed?" And I said, well, go ahead. And he stands up in front of the whole room and he says, I just like to walk out of the facility and be with the trees. I just want to be among the trees. And I said, thank you for sharing that and giving me a little credibility here. So yes. I heard something this morning that was just such a great idea. When you don't have time to take that walk, take a look at the 10 minutes that you spent scrolling on Facebook. It's like chances are you have 10 or 20 minutes somewhere that you're doing some sort of mindless scrolling or activity that could be better, better put to use with something that's more productive.
No,
So
totally agree. Okay, let's talk about the third building block.
So our third, we talked about managing the negative. This is the other half of the mindset. This is cultivating the positive. I talk about self-directed neuroplasticity. It's a fancy word for saying that, they used to think before there was neural imaging, before they could see what's going on in our brains, they thought meaning researchers thought that the brain stopped evolving in your early 20s. But we can actually see now that your brain continues to evolve and grow and change.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.